Hello, yoga students. It's a beautiful sunny day. I just finished the papers. Taking a deep breath outside and giving you some feedback. I would love to sit with each one of you for a half an hour and go over your papers. Since that's not possible, I'm going to give general feedback based on what I read. First of all, I enjoyed them so much. I love all the research you did, all the insights. I loved your topics. It's very satisfying to see all the hard work pay off through these papers. Secondly, I want to acknowledge and honor the process of writing a paper. So I know it takes hours with the data search, getting your thoughts together, revisions, getting your APA straight. It is a lot of work, and I know that every person that passes in a paper is hoping for an A, right? So I also want to share my intentions when I read these papers. So my intention is to help you grow as a writer. So I look at the guidelines, I look at the rubric, and I have read, I think we're getting into the thousands over, if I started teaching in 2005, and it's now, so for 14 years, I've been reading papers, and so I feel very confident and comfortable in my technique. So imagine when you read the feedback on your papers that I am a kind and loving editor. So you're going to read all the comments and it's going to say, this is not professional tone, or this is not proper grammar, right? So my intention is not picking apart your papers. My intention is an editor going through saying, nope, revise this, fix this, so that you could use my comments and revise your paper and publish it. So please know that I'm not picking it apart. So my process of grading, the way that I do it, is I take a look at the title page, make sure it's formatted correctly, then I go directly to the references. I look at the quality of the references. Are they less than 5 years old? Are they peer-reviewed nursing journals, right? So that's the best type of journal. When you know your audience is other nurses. You're writing to nurses. So your references that you choose should be at that level. So some references like the Mayo Clinic or the NIH, they're okay, but they are oftentimes written towards the general public, as the reader. If you are using medical journals and they're talking about cytokines and, BRCA markers, then that is a very medically focused, medically focused article, I guess. So right in the middle is the nursing focus, and, the strength of the paper is based on the strength of the resources. So knowing what your paper is based on helps me grade the appropriateness of your comments and your ideas. So I look at the sources, I look at the formatting of the reference page, and then I go back and begin to read the paper. Going through, I look at the objectives clearly, or the guidelines clearly, and the rubric, and see if the paper meets them. And so, the introduction paragraph, it should state everything you're about to talk about. So, review the literature around yoga as a healing and therapeutic modality for a special or specific health concern. So you're doing that. So you're reviewing the literature. You're also describing how yoga modalities are used in clinical areas or the following areas, such as clinical arenas, community settings, and personal use. So touching on all of those. You're relating it all to your specific population, and you're also reflecting on personal growth in the course, your self-healing process, and plans for future use of yoga. So all of this goes in the first paragraph very briefly, and then you begin. You talk about, say it's yoga, I don't want to use somebody's paper, yoga in healing patients, or the benefits of yoga for patients with post-traumatic stress disorder. So you would, first describe what post-traumatic stress disorder is in a way that is appropriate for other nurses to read, right? So you're not going into every detail about post-traumatic stress disorder like a report. We're assuming the reader knows a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder because we're nurse readers. Then you make your points based on the research that you found. So you have, post-traumatic stress disorder, yoga helps with PTSD because it helps decrease the stress response that patients feel when they get triggered. And you talk about the science of that using your research sources. Then the next point, organized, systematic, get to the end, and you making sure that you reflect for a paragraph or two on your personal growth, and then you conclude the entire paper summing up all of your points without adding any new information. So that's pretty much the recipe. And so each paragraph should connect to your thesis. So in some of the papers, there would be just a standalone paragraph about something, and it wouldn't connect to the paragraph before, the paragraph after, or the thesis. And so that, is not as strong. Another point that needs to be made, a few of the papers were not literature reviewed, or lit reviews, citing evidence around yoga as a healing modality for your topic. They were reports. So what is the difference between a report and a literature review? Well, I think I just described a literature review. So, what is a report? It would be like, what we did in high school or in different courses where it's like, diabetes is this, the incidence of diabetes is this, people with diabetes have these symptoms, people with diabetes, have these complications, and these are the treatments of diabetes. So a report is really just reporting on a topic, like it could be yoga and diabetes. A literature review or a research paper using evidence-based peer-reviewed literature is different. It's using the research to support your thesis. And your thesis is a question. It's not proven, really nothing is that proven, but your thesis is your idea that you feel is true, and then you need to support that because, and here's another theme, generalizations. So any statement you make that is not backed with evidence is a generalization. And, if I say, yoga aids in decreasing the stress response in patients with PTSD, period. And then my next sentence, how does an educated reader know that that's true? Right? So I have to defend that statement using evidence, and good evidence, right? So if I use, Women's Day or People Magazine, then that statement is really not valid. So there was a fair bit of that in some of the papers. So I also had a question that I don't know the answer to, And just to throw out there, if any idea that is not your own and not cited is plagiarism, then would it be appropriate to cite Broad, Butera, and Lassiter for most of the papers? Because, and the reason I'm wondering this is because many of the ideas that have come into your brains perhaps have been sparked by things that you read in Broad, Butera, and Lassiter. So some people did cite those sources, and others didn't. And I didn't take off if you didn't. But they definitely influence the way that our thinking, influence our thinking since we have read those books. So, okay. So, I wrote on a lot of papers, professional tone, anthropomorphism, and colloquialism. So those are common things that happen as you're growing in your paper writing skills. So professional tone would be not writing something like more research is needed because they're still figuring it out, right? So figuring it out isn't what you would read in a professional journal, nursing journal. You might say instead, more research is necessary because evidence is unclear to make these claims at this point, or something like that. Anthropomorphism is where you give you give a human or animal characteristic to a non-human situation. So, for instance, yoga feels that it's helpful in PTSD or something. Well, yoga isn't a human. It doesn't feel anything. So there were a handful of examples of that. So you look back and you realize that yoga doesn't feel. You would say the practice of yoga, blah, blah, blah. Colloquialisms are kind of slang terms. So I have a lot of problems in my writing with those because I speak in a very casual manner. I can recognize what professional wording is, but my manner, it tends to be more casual. So what I do after I write a paper or an email is I go back through and read and say, does this sound like something you would read in a nursing journal, or that a PhD would say? And then I go through and change to make my wording sound more professional. Okay. Okay. Always keep a professional nursing focus. Yeah, so that's going along with the same thing. So keeping a professional nursing focus and tone throughout your entire paper. And then I think lastly, when doing the reflections, some people wrote, the author of this paper feels that they benefited from the practice of yoga over the semester. Some people wrote, I feel, or I grew, spiritually through this semester. And because the guidelines said reflects on personal growth, I didn't take off any points for using I, but typically writing, moving forward, unless it's a reflection paper, you would not use first person. You'd keep it at a third person level. So I would love to talk to you about your papers if you wanted to Zoom together and we could go through them. I'm going to scan them all in tomorrow and send them to you by email so you can look at the feedback. I read every single word of every single paper. And that is another point that I wanted to make before I go real quick, is that I am traumatized by my, speaking of PTSD, by my nursing school experience. I felt there was a lot of unfairness, and that, you know, the instructors might just slap a B on my paper, but there wouldn't be a lot of feedback. And so I didn't understand why. And so or then I'd read somebody's who I thought was not as good as mine, and they got a higher grade, and I didn't understand why. So that has shaped my philosophy of correcting papers, and I spend a ton of time. At least 30 minutes on each paper, some papers an hour. So please know that I put a lot of time into them, and that I want you to know that my intention is to grade fairly. If somebody, the grades range from a 78 to a 97. So if somebody, you know, the person that got a 97 followed every single objective, their APA was immaculate, their professional tone, you know, it's almost a publishable paper in my opinion, then they worked really hard for that 97. So if then, you know, a 78 or 79 or an 80 paper missed two of the major guidelines, you know, needs a lot of work on APA, perhaps was not organized or didn't cite sources in, you know, multiple paragraphs, then that's why, you know, it's it wouldn't be fair to give a 92 to that paper, only 5 points less than the person who met every single guideline. So I know you know that, but I think that, you know, when you work so hard, sometimes it's also too hard to get a 78 and say, what? You know, I thought this was definitely a B. So if, you know, you have any questions, there's always the option of another faculty reader. I have not reviewed the policy, and I cannot remember whether, if you have another faculty reader read it, whether you have to accept the new grade. That was a policy in another program I worked in, and I'm not sure if it is here, but I can find out. So that is always an option if you are super unhappy with your grade. But so let me know, and I hope you have a great last few days of your semester and get everything in, and enjoy the beautiful spring and your summer. So thank you. Namaste.